Hello and happy Friday, team. I hope you all had a wonderful week as we head into the Labor Day holiday weekend. Hopefully you have something exciting planned. I did want to get this video out before the weekend hit just to go over a couple of best practices. NAR sent out a few consumer guides for you to start leveraging, to start educating your database, your clientele, your prospects on the new settlement guidelines, as well as a couple of clauses that Realty One Group has approved that I submitted to them. Actually, Realty One Group's using them as well, similar to our showing and compensation agreement that Realty One Groups has embraced. So we're working for you on the team side of things and giving stuff to Realty One Group to get it approved because we want to make sure we're following their guidelines as well and their policies. But let's dive in and cover a few things here. I'll try to make this as short as possible. Just want to make sure you guys are clear on how to present this, some do's and don'ts in this. So let's talk about the written buyer agreement, and then we'll jump into a couple of the other consumer guides, and then talk about the open house policy and some clauses that we've gotten approved. So what is a written buyer agreement? What does it do? Right? Again, you can share this. The better you read this and understand it, the easier it's going to be for you to explain it to your client. A written buyer agreement is an agreement between you and your real estate professional outlining the services your real estate professional will provide you and what they will be paid for those services. Right? Why am I being asked to sign an agreement? Written buyer agreements became a nationwide requirement for many real estate professionals as part of the National Association of Realtors, right? NAR proposed settlement of litigation related to broker commissions. The requirement went into effect on August 17th, 2024. Are these agreements new? In some places, yes, but as we know, many states have required them for years, right, as we learned through this process, while some have not. As a result, it is entirely possible you or others you know have not used them in the recent past. Regardless, they are now a nationwide requirement for many real estate professionals. Are these agreements negotiable? Yes, you should feel empowered to negotiate any aspect of the agreement with your real estate professional, such as the services you want to receive, the length of the agreement, and the compensation, if any. Compensation between you and your real estate professional is negotiable and not set by law. In the written agreement, the compensation must be clearly defined, and let's talk about that, and not open-ended or a range. Now there was a clause I submitted to Realty One Group, basically that had been out there in the market. I didn't create it, but I'd seen it shared by other brokerages that had a 3% or 4% commission on the buyer broker agreement. And in the additional terms, they said if the seller doesn't pay this commission, the broker is willing to accept a minimum of 2.5, 2%, whatever the number. Realty One Group rejected that clause. I submitted it to them to see if it would work, and they rejected it because it still has a range in it, right? It has to be clearly defined. What's the number? Is it 3%? Is it 4%? And so that's why we can't use that clause, okay? Only sign an agreement that reflects what you have agreed to with your real estate professional. How do I benefit from these agreements? These agreements clearly lay out what services, as a home buyer, expect your real estate professional to provide and what your real estate professional will be paid. These agreements make things clear and reduce any potential confusion at the outset of your relationship with your real estate professional. When do I need to sign an agreement? You will be asked to enter into a written buyer agreement with your real estate professional before touring a home, right, with them, either in person or virtually. If you are simply visiting an open house on your own or asking a real estate professional about their services, you do not need to sign a written buyer agreement. Does this mean I have to pay my real estate professional out of pocket? Not necessarily. While you are responsible for paying your real estate professional as outlined by your agreement, you can still request, negotiate for, and receive compensation for your real estate professional from the seller or the agent, right, which we know. Do agreements dictate a specific type of relationship I need to have with my real estate professional? No. Now, you guys know now that the buyer brokerage agreement, buyer broker representation agreement has exclusive or non-exclusive at the top, and that's what this is referencing. No, you are allowed to enter into any type of business relationship with your real estate professional allowed by the state law, right, where you are purchasing a home. Can I change or exit an agreement? Yes. We know Section 14 of the BBRA says if upon written notice, the buyer can cancel the agreement. You and your real estate professional can mutually agree to change your agreement. Agreements may have specific conditions under which they can be exited. So read the text of the agreement and speak with your real estate professional if you would like to change or exit your agreement. Now, you guys know we can change this agreement. We've talked about an addendum to modify the buyer broker representation agreement. I would say focus on two ways of modifying the agreement. If you put 3% and the seller's willing to pay 3% or 2% and you're willing to negotiate your commission, not the goal, but I imagine it's going to happen, and say you're willing to take 2.5% and the buyer says, okay, get the 2% from the seller, I'll pay you 0.5%, let's modify the agreement. You can simply cross off the commission on your buyer broker representation agreement, write 2.5 and have them initial that and date it. Okay, that's fine. When you would need a new agreement, or when I think it would be a best practice to have a new agreement, is if let's say that you're going to show a home for a specific property and the buyer broker representation agreement has addresses you could put in there. Now let's say you start off that way and you're going to show that one home, that buyer broker's representation agreement is exclusive to that one home or those two homes. And then you meet with them, you build rapport, and now they want to work with you. You can ink out a new buyer broker representation agreement, open-ended, for whatever home that they buy. Okay, that was when I believe a new buyer brokerage agreement would fall in line. Right. The consumer guide to open houses. Now, this covers a few things with open houses. Briefly cover this. If I'm attending an open house without an agent, do I need a written buyer agreement in order to tour the home? No, the consumer does not need to have a buyer broker representation agreement to tour the home. Right? Does the agent that's holding the open house need to have a buyer broker's representation agreement for prospects coming into the home? No, they do not. Now, this is where we talk about Realty One Group's policy of the open house. Now, the way that this is looked at is it's believed that when we're referencing the listing broker and seller, that means that the brokerage that's representing that seller, if I'm an agent at Realty One Group doing an open house for another agent at Realty One Group, I don't need to have a BBRA signed with a prospect coming in because I've been given direction from Realty One Group, the broker, my broker, and the seller, right, to do that open house. I'm with the same brokerage that holds that listing, regardless of being the listing agent or not. Right? I'm work with Realty One Group. I work for Realty One Group, and I'm holding an open house on a Realty One Group listing. I'm good. What Realty One Group is changing is their policy on holding open houses on other brokerages listings. They are now saying we are not allowed to do open houses on other brokerages listings because of this fact that we do not work for that broker. We do not work for that seller. We're an agent with an entirely different brokerage. And so they don't want to take any risks with a prospect coming in. Even if you sign a BBRA or not, right, we do not represent that brokerage. So they're just taking the stance that let's not make any more confusion here, right, or create any more confusion. Let's just say we're not doing open houses on other brokerages listings, okay? Very important. When will I be asked to sign an agreement with an agent? After you begin working with an agent at any point before you tour your first house together after that open house, okay? What does working with an agent mean? Buyer working with an agent. As soon as the agent begins to provide services such as identifying potential properties and arranging tours, agents who are simply marketing their services or speaking to a buyer at an open house or by providing a buyer access to a house they have listed are not considered to be working with the buyer. All right, so if you're the listing agent and you go to show your listing, you don't need a BBRA, right? Because you work for that seller. You're simply representing your seller by showing that home. Now, if that buyer wants to submit an offer on that listing, then by all means, you're going to need the duties owed, supplemental, the BBRA, and the consent act form to represent both parties. Or if that buyer wants to go see other properties, then you're going to need to have that BBRA signed, okay? What does it mean to tour a home? A tour is when a buyer who is working with an agent enters a home that is for sale or directs their agent to enter the home on their behalf, right? That includes, again, that virtual tour or video tour, right? Even if the buyer is not present. Right? What is the purpose of written buyer's agreements? Again, same thing as the first consumer guide. Clarity, transparency. Written buyer agreements lay out the service your real estate professional will provide and what they will be paid. Okay, buyers should not sign anything that includes terms they do not agree with or do not understand. You are in the driver's seat with these agreements, which are fully negotiable. Right, so that's your open house and written agreement consumer guide. This one is really our duties to our client, right? So what does it mean to be a realtor to act in the buyer's best interest? A realtor has an ethical duty to tell a buyer about every home available. This talks about steering, folks, right? We cannot dictate what homes we want to show our buyer because of the compensation that we're going to receive. That was a big part of this settlement, right? So we need to show our buyers every home that's available that meets their criteria. That means the realtor will let you know about all available homes, regardless of whether the seller or listing broker is offering compensation to your buyer's agent. And even if compensation offered by a seller or listing broker is less than what you agreed to pay your agent in your written buyer agreement. Now, your buyer may dictate that if you cannot find out, and I'm going to tell you, it's going to start becoming very difficult, or it's going to start changing to where listing brokers are not going to tell you what the amount of the compensation the seller is willing to pay. Now, I know you're going to try to call and get that information, but you're going to start hearing, hey, submit it in your offer, which means we're not going to be able to tell our buyer a specific number in many cases of what the seller is willing to pay. Now, you might have a seller that says, yes, I'm willing to pay. Submit your offer and we'll negotiate it, but they might not give you an amount. In most cases, they're not going to give you an amount. And so this is where the buyer just need to let them know that you're going to show the home to them, and you're going to put it in the offer, and then you're going to start negotiating, okay? What does it mean for a realtor to act in a seller's best interest? A realtor should explain to their seller the benefits and costs of the various types of marketing that can be done for a listing, and how potential buyers might respond to such marketing. And again, that means we're talking about offering possible compensation to the buyer broker, right? Buyers now may look at that and say, great, they're offering compensation to the buyer broker. That takes the weight off my shoulders. That's wonderful, and that's where the marketing will really have an impact by us not dictating showing homes that are or not offering compensation. It'll be the buyer, when you share with them, if there's compensation being offered or not, that may be them that dictates, yes, that's great. I want to see that home. They're offering compensation. But remember, you might not see every brokerage, every listing agent marketing compensation. So just because you don't see compensation being marketed doesn't mean that they're not offering it or they're not willing to offer it. So again, don't fall short with your buyers on trying to find just properties that are offering compensation out in the world of marketing. There's going to be properties that are going to be there that will offer compensation, but may not be marketed the same or as much as others, okay? Anyways, a realtor is ethically prohibited from telling a seller that their home will be hidden from buyers unless the seller pays a particular type or amount of compensation. Again, be careful with that conversation with your sellers. You can't sit down and say, seller, you need to offer compensation or your home's not going to be shown. We want to get rid of that language. The seller needs to be the driver in that. If the seller is astute, they're educated, they know that by offering a buyer broker fee based on you educating them on the new processes of the buyer, signing the buyer broker representation agreement and asking the seller to pay it. If they know that, once you've sat down with them, they're probably going to start trying to figure out a way to, if they want to get their home marketed, to appease that buyer in some ways by saying, hey, listen, I'm willing to pay some of the buyer broker fee. Let's show the home, let's get some offers in, and let's get rocking and rolling here, okay? Anyways, that has to be driven from the seller. And the clauses I'm going to cover are for that specific scenario where the seller says, listen, Damon, I want to offer a buyer broker fee because I know that the buyer has signed a buyer broker representation agreement, has to pay a commission. And if I offer this fee, it may make this home more enticing for the buyer because it's going to save them potential money or prevent them from having to pay a commission. What is wrongful steering? That is when we are ultimately choosing to show properties that are offering compensation or not, and we cannot do that, right? Steering buyers towards homes because the realtor will be paid more, or away from homes because the realtor will be paid less. Similarly, the realtor's code of ethics prohibits a realtor from telling a seller that buyers will be steered towards homes because the realtors will be paid more, or away from homes because the realtor will be paid less, right? How do written agreements protect me from steering? Right, as of August 17, 2024, you'll be asked to sign a written buyer agreement. And basically what this says is buyers agreeing to pay the commission. So it's irrelevant what the seller's offering. The buyers agree to pay that compensation. Again, going back to the buyer may be the one to say, listen, I want to see homes where the seller is offering compensation so I don't have to pay it, or at least all of it. Let the buyer make that decision. Let's move on to the clauses. So here's these clauses that have been approved by Realty One Group. The parties agree to amend Section 5 compensation to broker to reflect that seller wishes and approves, in addition to the compensation paid by the seller to the listing broker, that listing broker will publicly communicate and advertise that seller will compensate a buyer's broker in the amount of a certain percentage of the gross sales price or flat fee amount. Now, I sent this over. They did revise it. I believe that if a seller is going to offer or want to offer a specific amount, it should be with terms. And you can ask this to your seller: are there any specific terms that you need in order to pay this commission? Full list price offer, no buyer concessions, you name it. I would definitely ask the seller that if they're going to commit to a number. Because why do we want to have our seller commit to a number when it's going to be negotiated and we don't know what the offer looks like, right? The offer can come in 10,000 less, 20,000 less, and sellers, now you're promoting that they're going to pay 3% or 2%, right, commission or a flat fee amount, and the offer comes in less than the seller. It's not in writing. It's not in an agreement between the brokers. So if an offer comes in doesn't look right, that commission can change anyways, right? Seller can say, no, I'm not paying 3% with this offer. Let's counter back the commission or the offer amount. So I think it's best practice to have the terms the seller is willing to pay that certain amount. Okay. The next one leaves it more open-ended, and you might see this being used a little bit more, where the parties agree to amend Section 5 compensation of broker to reflect that the seller wishes and approves listing broker to disclose verbally or in writing to any inquiring buyer broker that seller is willing to negotiate compensation to any buyer broker subsequent to receiving an offer to purchase from a buyer. That just simply says, yes, seller's willing to pay a buyer broker fee, submit your offer, and we'll negotiate it. All right, and I think you're going to see that to become the more common of them all. Just finally, final touch on the open house policy. Again, I'm not allowed to do open houses on other brokerages listings. I found that out today, confirmed it today, found it out yesterday, and I wasn't aware of it. So just be aware of that. And if you guys have any questions, please reach out. Sorry for the long video, but ultimately, hopefully, it creates clarity on some stuff. I know you guys can read on your own, so just wanted to make sure I put in a couple of my own 2 cents there, so you're clear on some of the do's and don'ts with all of this stuff. You guys have an amazing rest of your week, of course, weekend, and enjoy the holiday, of course, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Take care.